Hey everyone, we are so excited to be here with Mike Zeller. I am going to give this incredible introduction to Mike because we're so excited to have Mike. Mike is a founder of 16 plus business ventures that have done over 100 million in revenue. He is um, also with peak performance and a business coach to top performing entrepreneurs, business owners, um, and even pro athletes around the globe. We're hoping to get some insight on the playoffs from Mike on this call. He helps guide leaders to rapidly rewire their nervous system to heal trauma, breakthrough areas where they are completely stuck in their business and mentally, and access their most powerful versions of themselves using a variety of tools. Today, Mike is going to take some time with us to break down how to reprogram your internal operating system for peak performance. Mike, welcome. So glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me, guys. And I'm going to take about 25 minutes and give you guys some of the most powerful tools out there for how to rewire yourself for peak performance. Stuff that you maybe haven't heard anywhere else. And I'm going to do it in powerful, condensed 25 minutes. So I'd love to just dive in and rock and roll. So I'm going to walk you guys through the slides. We'll supply those as well. But basically, I've been studying peak performance for 26 years now. And I've been asking myself, ultimately this one core question: how do I prime myself? How do I wire myself for peak performance, which entails eliminating sabotaging beliefs, patterns, and stories that have basically been handcuffing us. So you can think of these things as like dead weight, like you've been carrying around dead weight that is like dragging you down because now you're carrying something that's twice as heavy as you are, and it slows us down. And one of the bigger challenges that we have, which are several, is 90% of your thoughts today will be the exact same as yesterday. And so, how are we going to change if 90% of my thoughts today were exactly what I thought yesterday? Secondly, our subconscious beliefs rule rules our lives. So, if you think about our programming, it's notoriously difficult to reprogram your subconscious. And it's hard to get into your subconscious once you're past the age of 24, which is when you have your last stage of heightened neuroplasticity. Third, your memories are encoded according to feelings, because feelings activate the amygdala, which is what creates the memory. So, in other words, feelings, until they are changed, like if you had an overwhelming moment or you had trauma around money, like your parents lost their house or whatever it may be, then you're going to live in that state of scarcity, in that energy of scarcity until the feelings have changed, right? And so the fourth thing is you're likely no longer in a period of heightened neuroplasticity or moldability. I have a 3-year-old, and guess what? She's still in that range of heightened neuroplasticity where her nervous system, according to Dr. Bruce Lipton, who wrote the best-selling book called Beyond Belief, is that her nervous system up until age 7 is in a hypnotic state, very absorbent. All right. And then you have a second window that we've recently found in the last 10 years between ages 17 and 24, where your brain is changing again. And it's a higher state of modability. But after 24, we're basically, a cooked turkey, like on Thanksgiving Day. And when you're a cooked turkey, guess what? There's not a whole lot of, you can't make it juicier again. Right. So if you burn the turkey, it's burned. Nothing you can do about that. And then if you throw in some extra challenges like trauma or PTSD, or you grew up in an environment that's less than favorable, or you've been through a few challenges in your business or your marriage or your family life or your health, guess what? Those things are still often lingering in our nervous system. And so my process ultimately is more about rewiring your nervous system, because your nervous system is so much deeper than your mindset. And if you've heard the book, The Body Keeps the Score, it's ultimately about your body. Your body is going to overrule your mind. And that's why FBI, what do they do lie detector tests? Not on your words, because people can cover up their words, but on the nerve impulses, the signals from your body. That's how they measure and pay attention to what's going on in your body, right? They want to measure that. Now, some of this deeper work I do now, which is about helping high performers across the globe rewire their nervous system, and I take the toughest cases, meaning severe levels of PTSD, trauma, abuse, molestation, that are showing up now in their business, that are showing up now in their marriage. So those are some of the favorite ones that I get, but I also like the ones that are easier, where they're just like, hey, I have a whole nother level I can access, but I can't freaking get there yet, and I don't know how. I keep self-sabotaging, or I'm afraid, or I don't know how to step into what I could do, taking that next leap in my business or my practice, expanding to multiple offices, whatever it may be. Well, I got into this deeper layer of work because in 2022, my wife, who's a 3-time suicide survivor, um, grew up with a crazy, abusive, narcissistic uh, parents. So her parents were horrible individuals in the sense of how they treated their children, and she attempted suicide by the age, or 3 times by the age of 21. And then when we had our daughter, guess what? It triggered an avalanche of suicidal ideation, depressive thoughts, complex PTSD, panic attacks, a lot of stuff I didn't even know anything about. I didn't know how to navigate it. I was kind of jumping in the frying pan trying to figure it out. So and ultimately, I was also still stuck being a man who was disconnected from my heart. Most men, or many men, that's the biggest complaint wives have about their husbands, is that they are disconnected from their heart. And I would have described myself as almost emotionally constipated because I grew up in a home where the only safe emotions were anger. And my parents were good people, but they didn't know how to express emotion. They didn't know how to process emotions, and they frankly still don't. So I had to learn a lot of those things. And so in the midst of this mental health crisis, I had to start learning a lot of different things on how to heal trauma and PTSD. And why I think this is important is a lot of leaders, we just grind through our trauma. We just push through. We are high functioning, but this operating system is often being sucked up. Energy is being sucked up to run and handle these problems in the background. And I see it happen more and more, especially coming out of COVID. Like there is some weight and heaviness that we carry as leaders that the ordinary employee doesn't. If you own a business and you have staff and you have payroll and you have expenses and you have capital expenses and you have overhead, you're carrying a lot of things that the ordinary person doesn't have to carry. And then if you have this thing in the background from childhood, or the thing in the background from a few years ago with a business partner or an employee, that can be sabotaging your potential in a massive way. So I'm not going to go through my whole journey with my wife, but basically the conventional diagnosis said, hey, you are going to be stuck with a bag of pills. You're going to be stuck with coping and managing the symptoms. And I looked at my wife and our 1-year-old daughter. And I was like, hell no, that's not going to be our reality. We've got to find a solution. And we ultimately did, which we'll get into a little bit. And this led to this deeper understanding of how high performers have optimized their nervous system and have leaned into getting their nervous system at a whole nother level that the ordinary performer does not. Okay. I love this quote from Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote the book Body Keeps the Score, which has sold millions of copies. He says, our maps of the world are encoded in the emotional brain, and changing them means having to reorganize that part of the central nervous system. So I had to learn that. I had to learn how to help her rewire her nervous system so we could get our life and our marriage back, which we ultimately did. But we had to go through these layers. And so I share this to share, hey, if you're going through some of those deeper challenges, also feel free to reach out to me. I would love to support. I've been in those dark valleys of despair, and I don't like anyone to suffer. And I'll help you find the right resources wherever you're at, point you in the right direction, and share some of our journey. So that's a little side tangent, but it helped me understand how to if I could reprogram, help my wife reprogram, help myself ultimately heal some trauma too. I didn't recognize some of the trauma I was carrying as an entrepreneur. Then I can help anyone from the darkest layers, right? The darkest challenges. All right. And these are the things, the 5 core things you have to work through and reprogram to go to that next level. Your identity. I like to say your identity precedes your destiny. And then your self-worth. This is how you ultimately feel about yourself, which also can mean, how am I creating? How am I building my wealth? Am I doing it out of a state of to earn love, or am I doing it from a state of already received love? Okay. The stories we tell ourselves, you know, and the interpretations of the meaning of those stories. Kobe Bryant interpreted failure as a stepping stone. Sarah Blakely, one of the world's wealthiest women, one of the few billionaires, self-made billionaires as a woman, guess what? She saw failure as a stepping stone, not as a failure, but as a growth pattern, right? Energetic home and vibration. Are you in a state of suffering? Are you in a state of fear? Are you in a state of doubt? Are you in a state of scarcity? You can be wealthy and have a big bank account and still be in a state of scarcity, okay? Or trauma. Trauma would be the fifth thing. And trauma, as leaders, we don't like to acknowledge trauma, mainly because we don't want to unravel, right? We got too much responsibility to unravel. Well, a lot of the leaders that I help with trauma, we navigate that pretty quickly, usually in a handful of days or sometimes a handful of months, what would take the ordinary person years to even get there. I'm not going to go too far on trauma, but I just want to mention a few things that what trauma really is it's stuck or unprocessed emotion. So in other words, it gets frozen in your nervous system, and then in your nervous system, it becomes almost like concrete barrier to healing because that part of you has gotten frozen. And until it gets unfrozen, that emotion is still hijacking and basically driving parts of your life, parts of your operating program. And that's why you see it show up in marriages. You see it show up in how you raise your kids. You see it show up in financial decisions where we act irrationally or less strategically in building up businesses or ventures. All right. But how do we get through that? Part of it is we got to prime our nervous system for optimal performance, which means you got to learn how to access the subconscious. There's tools that you can use that can help you access the subconscious and literally repattern your brain waves. Things like neurofeedback. I'm not going to go too far in neurofeedback, but that's a great tool that 20 sessions, literally your brain can go from a fixed state to a flexible state. All right. And guys like Tom Brady, 7-time Super Bowl winning champion, have used tools like that to prime his brain for peak performance. Second one, integrate, acknowledge, and release pain, traumas, limiting beliefs, fears, and more. Let those things move through us, okay, so that they do not get stuck and become repressed anger. And that's a challenge for leaders, okay? Third one is finding a powerful alter ego. This is one of my favorites. Dr. Dre, that's not his real name. Kobe Bryant had Black Mamba. Beyonce, that's not her real name, right? That became, Sasha Fierce was her alter ego, and she had to create an alter ego that allowed her to step into this higher level version of herself. The fifth or fourth thing is repatterning the beliefs and the energy and the triggers. So with leaders, an obvious one is obviously in marriage. I've worked with some other leaders in the space, actually in the dental space, that have where we've reprogrammed some triggers that are showing up both in their marriage and in their business, because you're a whole human being. If you have triggers and you get triggered in work, guess what? They're going to show up, and they might dictate how you react, and you might react irrationally instead of respond. But if you heal some of those triggers, then the energy and the emotion of those triggers are released, right? Then my favorite thing, this is after we've gotten through some of the heavier, harder stuff, we can reprogram your nervous system to activate flow state. Flow state is a positive psychological state where you release all 6 neurochemical cocktails and you feel this heightened state of connection of you're in the zone. Like you see athletes, they get in the zone and they can't miss a shot, right? Well, we can do the same as an entrepreneur, or business owner, or leader, or speaker, or whatever. We're just locked in. And ironically, the people who experience the most flow state in their life are also the happiest. Okay. And sometimes it's just repatterning our work rhythms, how we show up in life, organizing our work around the things that we're amazing at and doing less and less of the things that we suck at. And so that's where my book, The Genius Within, came in. I was helping leaders find their deepest area of genius because I knew if they lived out of their strengths, and you'll never find someone who accomplishes something extraordinary that played consistently out of position. Yes, we all have to play out of position for brief moments, but for the long term, if you get yourself in exactly the right position and other people in exactly the right position, you can build a really thriving organization. Okay. So, so let me continue on here. Here's a powerful thing about when you're working through some of these deeper layers of our nervous system is if you change the feeling, you have therefore changed the memory, and you have changed the past, which means you change the present, and you also change your destiny. So I can literally change today by changing my feeling and my emotion associated with a past overwhelming experience. Okay. And so that's some of the work I do is almost always a lot of leaders and CEOs that I work with will start a session, and some of the sessions that I do are like about a day, 6 or 7 hours. We'll start the session and they'll know 3 or 4 things that are sabotaging how they show up. They'll be aware of 3 or 4 things when we start the day. But then when we go in, we'll find 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 other things that they totally forgot about. Because we're in that safe space, their body feels safe to release those and acknowledge them, and then we can move through them and let them go. All right. So, and this is why it's also important to not just change your thoughts or your mindset, because those things are like sitting on top of our nervous system. If they're sitting on top of our nervous system, guess what? It's like they're the tip of the iceberg, but the stuff underneath is actually really running the show. All right. And so that's why you can't, the thoughts are almost surface level. The feelings are basically causing the thoughts. It's like they're spewing up almost like a volcano, right? And so we got to deal with both our thoughts and our feelings and help them all shift. But if you only shift your thoughts, guess what? Your feelings will always override. That's why in business, you often hear phrases like we decide emotionally, but we justify rationally.
Mhm.
All right. Because we're driven, our hearts, and in fact, what's kind of crazy about our heart versus our brain, Heart Math Institute has found that your brain or your heart is 65 times more electromagnetically powerful than your brain, and actually sends, if I remember correctly, sends 4 times the amount of information to your brain than your brain sends to your heart. And it literally sends out an electromagnetic signal measured by ECGs that radiates up to 8 feet. Okay, so it's so important, which is where the hotbed of your feelings are. You got to shift and heal and align our heart. All right. Well, actually, here's the research. I forgot that was on the next slide. So, and then you also think about our muscle memory. And this is related to past trauma, past memories, past experiences. Our red blood cells live an average of 115 days, but our skeletal muscle cells live an average of 15 years or 5,475 days. So that thing called muscle memory is really freaking real. And if we don't acknowledge that and we don't use it to our advantage, okay, high performers know how to use their biology to their advantage. All right. So key ingredients in terms of reprogramming your nervous system and harnessing emotional power. So when I think of emotional power, I'm thinking, Tony Robbins stepping on stage. I'm thinking of Oprah Winfrey. I'm thinking of a dynamic, gravitating speaker or leader that just moves the energy of a team, a business, an organization. Right. So there's some key ingredients. They've integrated the trauma, so they're no longer controlled by this unhealthy thing. Like when Tom Brady shows up at the Tampa Bay Bucks, they win the Super Bowl that first year, but he is so integrated and so powerful in his presence and so connected. He feels he's leading with integrity from within. Okay. Second part, reprogramming the triggers. And the third part is optimizing the neurochemistry. This is supplementation, vitamins, minerals, nutrients. NAD is a big one. And then fourth is emotionally visualizing the desired outcome. And then fifth, reverse engineering the pathway is part of the visualization. Michael Jordan, Tom Brady would see him making that Super Bowl winning pass. Steve Jobs would see Apple taking off and doing X, Y, Z, right? With the iPhone or the whatchamacallit, iPad. All right, next piece is the velvet hammer versus the jackhammer. Some of us we can get by with a velvet hammer, incremental progress. We don't need the most powerful tools. Some of us we need a jackhammer. I'm going to talk about some things that are what I would call jackhammers, like really powerful tools that are groundbreaking and are some of the biggest breakthroughs in modern mental health, but also I'd say in modern peak performance. So one of them is the use of psychedelics, which is each state is different. By the way, I want to acknowledge it's not fully legal in each state. Ketamine is legal in most states. Psilocybin is legal in 3 or 4 states. Utah just legalized MDMA for therapeutic use as of April, and it's expected to be federally legalized by the end of August. Congress is waiting on the VA to give their protocol, basically, before they write it into law. So it's coming down the pipeline, but it should be on your radar if you have anyone dealing with mental health or trauma blocks or anything along those lines, because it actually shows up more commonly in CEOs and business owners than you would think. In fact, a higher percentage of CEOs and business owners deal with mental health challenges because of all the responsibility and the weight than the normal, ordinary person, but they often don't deal with it because we just move on. We got too much weight. We don't have time to deal with it. So I'm not going to guide you guys through NLP visualization, but I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the results I see when I work with clients. I had a client recently, husband and wife duo. They're entrepreneurs, business owners. They flew up to work with me, and the wife had massive phobias around flying. Literally would get on a plane would almost give her a panic attack, and then she had some PTSD from an abusive relationship 21 years ago. Well, after our session, her phobia went down to 1, and her trauma that was controlling and dictating her patterns with men for 21 years, and particularly in their 8-year relationship, basically was dissolved because of what we did together. And so I'm not going to break down all the things because we just don't have time for that. But I want you guys to recognize that there's a few other things that wherever you're at as a leader, you can be free. You can let go and you can repattern your nervous system. I'm going to mention a few things. One of the major tools is I mentioned neurofeedback. Neurofeedback is typically available in most states, and it's legal all over the place, so it's not an issue. But it's a great tool for basically literally resets your brain waves. And so you can go from a stressed, anxious state to a calmer, centered state over 10 to 15 sessions. All right. Another one is the use of psychedelics. And non-psychedelics like MDMA is technically an empathogen and just floods your nervous system with love and safety and empathy. But your neuroplasticity, what they found is your neuroplasticity surges for 3 to 6 hours while you're on the medicine, which is when you want to do the deeper levels of guidance, once it's legal or once, in whatever state you're in. And then the second part is you have 2 weeks where your nervous system or your neuroplasticity is like that of a teenager, or not a teenager, a little kid. All right. And so I'm not going to go through all this stuff here, but I just want to mention that when you look at peak performance, there's so many groundbreaking processes and options for getting on the other side of anything that's blocking you right now. We're in the greatest era of expansion and transformation in mental health and in peak performance that we've ever had in our lifetime. And I just want to invite you guys to explore some of the things. Some great resources. Dr. Daniel Amen has a few different books. Like one is his latest is You Happier. But if you're leading from a happier state, you're leading from a more connected state, you're leading from a more vibrant state, your business or practice, then guess what? Your employees, your team, your partners, your investors, or whoever, your family is going to be more drawn to you. And you're going to be more magnetic and resonant as a leader. And it's really like you're going to flow downhill instead of fighting uphill with resistance and just grit and determination. And I'll share one story with one of my other dentist clients. His name's Mark. He recently sold his practice for 8 figures. I won't disclose the exact sum, but when we first sat down for dinner, and this is back 7 years ago, and he said, I asked him, hey, Mark, so we were literally just meeting. I was like, hey, what do you do? What's your story? Blah, blah. He's like, oh, I'm a dentist. And I was like, cool. How do you like that? Like, I don't like it. It's not fun for him. It wasn't fun at the time. Like, all right, I got you. And then I started investing a little bit more. I said, Mark, it sounds like you're really an entrepreneur who owns a dental practice, and that's who you really are. But being in the day-to-day of running each, the operations and seeing all the patients, you really wanted to build a thriving practice, not necessarily run the operations and see every single patient. And he's like, yeah, that's actually what I want. And so then we started, we became good friends and started working together on some things. And then I started helping him see he had an identity. I am a dentist. All right. That was the label he put on himself. But then as his identity shifted, remember we talked about that at the beginning, his identity precedes your destiny. And I said, Mark, so if you're a business owner who happens to own a dental practice, then how does that shift things? And then he started creating freedom to build his dental practice, and it actually scaled far bigger. And he started seeing, all right, I actually own the dental practice, and he also started investing in real estate and a few other ventures and building wealth in other domains. But then he reduced over time, he reduced his time in the office from every day to 1 day a week, eventually 1 day a month. And eventually, by the time he sold it for 8 figures, much more than he thought he would get, he was in the practice a couple days a quarter. Now he's guiding and directing and supporting and built the systems and the processes. He did the hard work around it, and he was free, and he was free to be who he really is and build a practice in a way that was deeply aligned with himself. But it comes down to his identity, the stories, the beliefs, and the decisions that overflow or that flow downhill from those things. So I hope that makes sense, guys. Would love to serve you guys. Feel free to reach out if you want to have a conversation, do a discovery call to see how I can support or work with you, and help you guys break free to the next level. So that's all I got, Spencer. Hope that's helpful.
Thanks so much, Mike. It's great visiting and talking with you. More on Mike on dentistadvisors.com, and more to come from Mike as we dive more into everything that he can help with from a business perspective, mental health perspective. Mike, thanks so much for your help and your time.
Got it.